this was an attempt at what I think is best described as industrial sabotage. And I'm glad that eventually the government called them out, because we can't afford to be victims of being held to ransom by the Chinese or any other country that's intent on industrial sabotage.
It's now time for our Sunday political panel. We've got an excellent lineup for you as ever, and we're going to be discussing, I think, really the fallout and the implications and the many different strands that emerge from the big day, historic day yesterday in Parliament, where that emergency legislation regarding steel and British steel production at Scunthorpe was rushed through with that emergency legislation in the House of Commons, and of course going through the House of Lords. I sat in some of the debate there just before I kind of had to race over here to present the show. But it was a big moment, and there's big questions, aren't there? We went through some of them yesterday, but it'd be really interesting to hear from my panellists, and of course to hear from you. You know, what does this mean? We just had a really interesting conversation with the geopolitical expert Sir Robin Niblett, talking about how, you know, what the globalisation, there were winners, there were losers. What's this new era of I suppose, modern globalisation going to look like? Are we all going to be trying to onshore more of these industrial jobs back? But at the same time, we've also been striving to try and become a knowledge economy as well. There's lots of kind of different tensions within these discussions. And of course, there's the issue about, you know, net zero and the green agenda as well. So there's lots of different things to sort of tease out of this discussion. So we're going to have a really good chat. Let me introduce my panel to you. As ever, really grateful to them for giving up a bit of time, particularly on such a busy weekend when many of them had to rush back to Parliament yesterday, or if they weren't there, they were probably glued to their screens watching everything that was going on. So really grateful to them for giving up a bit of time. And Parliament is going into recess. So this could be the first day where they kind of kick back and relax, but they are speaking to us instead. So we're very grateful. Let me introduce the panel. Welcome to the show, Sonia Kumar. She's the Labour MP for Dudley, and she's a member of the Business and Trade Committee. Hello, Sonia.
Hi, Aisha, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you very much for being with us. Welcome back to the show, Sir Christopher Chope, the Conservative MP for Christchurch. Sir Christopher, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Aisha. And
welcome back to the show as well, Adrian Ramsey, the Green Member of Parliament for Waveney Valley and co-leader of the Green Party. Adrian, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Good to be here.
And welcome to the show again. A good friend of the show, Bethany Dawson, who is the diary reporter for the mighty London Playbook at Political. We all wake up with you and your words, Bethany, regularly.
And what a privilege it is to be with you all every morning.
So, Christopher, I'm going to come to you first because you didn't get the chance to voice your views yesterday as you were chairing things. What's your take on what happened yesterday?
Well, I thought that it was an excellent debate, and I think the government's done the right thing. My view was that actually they could have acted earlier at the beginning of the week, and if they'd done that, then we would have had more opportunity to scrutinise the legislation. But they missed that opportunity, and so we went ahead with it. And I was onto this issue about a fortnight ago because in my constituency, a firm called Reed Steel, they make steel structures which they export across the world, and those steel structures need to have virgin steel to give them the quality that they require. And they alerted me to the fact that it was the intent of the Chinese owners to close down the works at Scunthorpe. And immediately after that, I put down questions to the department, and even as of Tuesday, I was receiving basically holding answers saying we're still in discussions. Well, obviously by Tuesday, the government must have been aware of the dire situation we were in, and in the end, they acted, and the result is where we are now, which is a holding position rather than a final position. We obviously go on to discuss what happens next.
And it is a holding position, Adrian Ramsey, isn't it? Because the business secretary has said nothing's off the table, including nationalisation. But he said, and the Lords Minister as well said, that if they could find a commercial partner, that's what they would like to do. What do you think will happen next, or what do you think should happen next?
is indeed a holding position, one that I supported, but the government needs to be clear about what the next steps will be. And I think there's two key factors there. One is to recognise the inevitable that steel is going to need to be in public ownership, because that's the way we're going to secure the future of the industry. And otherwise, we're just going to be subsidising a foreign-owned company rather than running it in a way that ensures we can direct its future. And secondly, we need to get steel onto a green path, run through electric arc furnaces, and focused on producing the steel we absolutely need for a transition to a livable future, whether that's wind turbines, whether that's trains, train tracks, all the many things we really need steel for to realise our crucial climate goals and all the economic opportunities that come with that. So we need the government to recognise the inevitable that there is going to be public ownership and make sure that it's focused on doing it in a way that meets our climate goals. It's focused on green steel and all the ways it can be used for the transition to a green future.
I mean, one of the things that came up in the debate yesterday, Adrian, was the fact that steel is very energy intensive. Obviously, our energy costs are very, very high in this country. And the point was made that arc furnaces, which is the more green way of doing steel, is even more expensive. I mean, what's going to happen in that transition period when, lots of people, of course, in Port Talbot is moving to these arc furnaces. I'm sure eventually Scunthorpe will move there as well, but they are expensive in terms of energy consumption.
Thing in any sector that we're trying to electrify more, and there's several of them, is that we can make sure that the electricity that's being used is produced from renewable sources. We need to accelerate the move towards renewable energy. But crucially, as you were suggesting earlier, this also feeds into the whole debate around what does our economy look like as a whole. And we've even heard government ministers saying in the last week, could this be the end of economic globalisation as we know it? Well, for decades, the Green Party has been saying that economic globalisation has only increased inequality around the world and at home. It's resulted in us offshoring jobs. It's made us less resilient to a volatile political climate and to climate breakdown. We now have a huge opportunity to invest in our own industrial manufacturing base, in supporting our farmers to produce more of the food we need in the country. These are sectors of the economy that are crucial not only to tackling the vulnerability of the international political environment and to the wars that we have, but also to making sure that we're prepared for the effects of climate breakdown that's coming down the track.
And Sonia, I mean, it's interesting because this discussion has prompted a much wider discussion, and we saw some of that in certainly the Lords debates that I listened to yesterday. As I said, a great amount of consensus over the need to do this, but questions being raised. Is public ownership, is this now time for a Labour government to have a serious conversation about public ownership, not just of British Steel, but actually our big, precious utilities and are those kind of important sovereign industries? We've talked about, bringing back an industrial base in this country. Does this Labour government need to pivot to more British public ownership of utilities and big sovereign industries?
I think it depends on the industry, and it needs to be looked at industry by industry. Now, British Steel, the options will all be open. Now, the Jingye company has had multiple problems with their company finances. The auditors have left. We've had a number of problems with the fact that they haven't filed their company taxes. So it's looking at each of the industry one by one. Now, we know already that 95% of our steel for rail comes from our British Steel. 3 out of 4 products that are from construction are from British Steel. So it is really important to make sure that we are backing the industrial strategy completely. So I welcome that we will have an industrial strategy come forward that will be, and also a steel strategy that will Johnny Reynolds will be releasing as well. I think in terms of when we're looking at what we've already done, we've already said we're going to back British industry superpower when it comes to supercharge, when it comes to lowering bills, when it comes to energy, because we know that's one of the biggest barriers.
And when do you think bills will come down? Because that's the question that everybody wants to know. Because pre the election, Labour said we're definitely going to get your bills down by £300. But now, what's the time frame for that happening? Because that is germane. The cost of energy is absolutely germane to if you want to rebuild an industrial base in this country and for consumers.
So I can't say to you this is the exact date or time as much as I would love to do that. But I think what we need to do is that we know that the economic position at the moment is changing rapidly. When it's not the same as it was before. Position that we inherited in July in 24 is completely different to what we have now, whether it's with tariffs, whether it's looking at what's going on with Ukraine and wars that are going on. So it is going to have a knock-on effect. But, Labour, we've always said we are going to back GB Energy. We are backing the industry when it comes to looking at alternative ways, including electric. I know you said, Adrian, that actually electric, to go to electric furnaces, but doesn't produce the same quality of steel, which is a problem for when we're looking at the construction defence. So I think for me, we need to be thinking about it's about when things are more settled, but it's a changing environment, and we just be quite reactive to what's happening and plan as much as we can.
And one of the suggestions that was put forward yesterday by Dale Vince, who of course is a leading kind of eco-energy industrialist, he's a big donor to the Labour Party, said one of the easiest ways that the Labour government could help get energy prices down was break the link between gas prices and renewable energy prices. Is that something that the government should look at?
I think everything should be on the table. When we're looking at how we bring down the cost of living and bring down it, and bills in particular, we've got a long-term strategy of GB Energy, as I've mentioned. And I think I'm not going to say we should not do this, we shouldn't do that. I think everything should be reviewed. There should be an assessment on this and to see what is the best option, the most viable option for us to go forward to secure the future for us.
And Bethany, what do you think the political fallout of this will be? Look, this do you think this will be seen as a success for Keir Starmer? He's had some trouble with his domestic polling ratings. We've got big elections coming up on the horizon, but there was a lot of consensus across politics that this was the right thing to be doing. Do you think this will help him in terms of his ratings and how people see the Labour Party ahead of these elections?
I think for communities directly affected by the steelworks, all of the workers there, and then people within industries related to that, construction and defence, I think support, we can expect support might increase. It's what happens next. There's, as we've heard from the rest of the panel, there are so many unknowns. That's not really at the fault of anybody right now. You can't pass emergency legislation in one day and have the next 6 months all sort of nailed down. But it depends what's next, I think, and how successful that is. And as you say, how that relates to things like bringing down energy bills, how it relates to constructing new railways and building our defence infrastructure. It's right now, this is a good thing, I think. And as you say, the consensus that we've seen across the political spectrum is not only good for the polling, it's good for democracy to see everybody going, actually, this is a good idea. We're not going to do infighting. Yes, we're going to criticise and we're going to try and build this to be better. But actually, good going, thumbs up. Let's keep moving. That's a good thing. I am not sure, just by the nature of politics, that those good vibes are going to necessarily continue. And that will be difficult.
And I suppose that this emergency legislation has been passed, but there's so many big questions now about what happens. Remember, this was a plant that was losing £700,000 a day. The government said that they had to take control of this because they felt that the company was deliberately trying to not get the iron ore and the coke in to keep the blast furnaces going. And the big thing we all learnt yesterday is that you have to keep these blast furnaces going. You have to keep them hot. If they cool, the whole show is off the road, basically. So that's why they kind of stepped in. But, it's going to be difficult to get a commercial partner to come in and take over something like this. And if the government comes in and renationalises this, it will open up questions, and to Adrian's point, about a big conversation about public ownership.
Yeah, it will kind of create, I think, a domino effect of conversations about other industries to nationalise. Of course, there's already conversations. Labour have said that they want to renationalise the railways. There are conversations right now about water utilities and how to sort of manage those that are struggling. But there will be so many questions. And also, I think whilst those in Scunthorpe in this particular plant are happy to see this legislation go through, people affected by similar things in the Tata Steel port in Wales, they're not feeling as happy because their plant wasn't saved, right? So I think there is going to be a ripple effect of more difficult conversations as the kind of waters cool from the last 48 hours. Other things are going to crop up and it's going to be difficult. And economically speaking, because this went through in such an emergency manner, we can assume that this wasn't in the budget last autumn. It wasn't in the spring statement we just had. The government already have said so many times that the purse strings are tight. This is only going to tighten them further. And again, it's just swirling into these more conversations, more complications that are going to be difficult. It's going to be a real challenge of management for this.
It is, and as you say, we're we've just had the spring statement. This has come out of the blue after the spring statement. We're looking ahead to the budget. We know that's already going to be difficult. There's going to be a sort of spending update coming up in the summer where there's probably going to be big spending cuts announced. And there is going to be an industrial strategy produced as well. But this is going to be, very, very, it's going to make those numbers very, very even tighter for the Chancellor. And she already had very little wriggle room or fiscal headroom after that spring statement. Well, look, stay with us. Lots more to discuss with this. Lots of you are messaging in. I'm just going to read this message out before we have a break. This is from Mark from North London. He says, I had to stand outside Parliament on that sunny Saturday back in 1982. That's when Parliament was last recalled. It was impossible to even get into the building, let alone get into the public gallery. I listened to the debate on the radio. I have a picture somewhere of Dr. David Owen doing a TV interview. So we have somebody who remembers that time. Thank you so much, Mark. And do keep your comments coming in. Lots. I will try and get through some of these comments after the break. You can text 87222, start your message with the word Times. You can tweet us at Times Radio and you can WhatsApp us 0333 003 2353. Lots of you are messaging in wanting to have a conversation about public ownership and also just reflecting on whether it was wise for successive governments to flog off the family silver. And should we be pivoting? If Donald Trump has sparked a conversation about, America first, we're having to do a bit of, thinking about the interests of the United Kingdom. We heard Keir Starmer saying kind of globalisation is over. It's talking about onshoring jobs again, building up an industrial base. Is this now the right time to be having those conversations about a public ownership? We'll have that discussion. Lots of messages coming in. I am just going to read something. Kate says, I remember 1982 in that debate listening to Michael Foot's speech. Brilliant. Ross says 700,000 a day. I don't believe it. Anything from China and Russia must be taken as a lie. I wouldn't believe them if they told me my name. Rob says, thank goodness for Trump. Your current conversation wouldn't be happening without him. And Liam's got a question about the steelworks saying, do we have to buy it back from the Chinese or is it just taken back? And Swervy has messaged in, and I think we'll use Swervy's message as a sort of launching off point because this is the topic I wanted to get onto. He says, yes, Aisha, yes, speaking as a lifelong Tory voter until last July, I can say the great privatisation experiment has utterly failed. So yes, it is time to talk about renationalising certain sovereign industries, steel, water, gas, electricity and railways. None of these work properly or as envisaged and simply act as glorified cash machines for overseas owners. Time to sort it out. He says, loving the show as always. Well, thank you very much, Swervy. Sir Christopher Chope. Now, the Conservatives did really privatise a lot. I was looking back the dates from after that third election, 1987. It wasn't just British Steel, it was British Petroleum, Rolls-Royce, British Airways, water. I mean, there is a kind of growing consensus that it doesn't feel like privatisation is working particularly well for the great British consumer at the moment. There was that advert, Tell Sid. Well, Sid's got back in touch saying it's not really going so well. What do you think about that? Do you think privatisation has failed? Do you think it is time, almost from a sort of national security point of view, to take some of these key utilities and sort of sovereign industries, these really important sovereign industries, which are important to our national security as well? Is it time to bring them in-house?
Well, I think, Aisha, it's horses for courses. And what has happened since that period in the 1980s when we took a lot of enterprises out of the public sector and gave them the opportunity to be in the private sector, is that the government, instead of seizing ownership as a way of controlling industry, has increased its regulatory power. And it's the regulatory levers now which I think are in control. And going back to the issue of British Steel, the government's regulatory power to effectively require those organisations, British Steel, to have very much higher electricity costs than they would otherwise have. That is an example of the government controlling things without actually owning them. And I think looking forward on British Steel, we're going to have the first challenge for the government is going to be what is going to happen when we find that those blast furnaces need to be renewed or upgraded, because they probably only got 4 or 5 years life left in them. And as Sonia was saying earlier, we can't produce virgin steel using electric arc furnaces, which are very expensive. Therefore, those are going to be the sorts of challenges, but they're going to be determined not by government ownership so much as by a government regulation. And that's true across the whole of the other areas which you were mentioning. So I think we should be looking at the role of government regulation and how it's accountable to Parliament rather than who owns it. But
don't you think that regulation has just so failed? I mean, look at Ofwat. I mean, everyone is tearing their hair out about the state of the water companies. It's a natural monopoly water. All it seems to be doing is we're getting, sewage pumped into all our, rivers. And the only people making money out of this are the shareholders, that making sure they get their sort of dividends. I mean, that's a classic example of where it doesn't feel like regulation really works anymore.
Well, it's fashionable to have a go at Ofwat, and I'm going to join in, because I think that what has happened is that Ofwat have imposed on these water companies restrictions upon their ability to be able to increase their prices. And if you're going to invest in new sewage works and so on, then that costs money, and the only way you can finance it is through the business. And that ultimately means that the consumers have to pay. But Ofwat has been telling these companies that they're not allowed to increase the prices as much as they would like. And it's only the last 18 months or so that they've suddenly started relaxing that. And the consequence is water bills are going at a far higher rate than one would have wished.
So you've got no buyer's remorse over privatisation?
Oh, absolutely, quite the reverse. I mean, if you look at, for example, British Aerospace, remember that was in the public sector. British Aerospace is thriving, and its share price is at record levels by privatising British Telecom. I mean, you're too young to remember the time when, if you wanted a telephone, you basically had to go in a queue and wait for as long as you have to wait for an NHS operation these days. So as a result of privatisation, we then had other people entering the market with competition. Competition is what we should be aiming for. And one of the problems which we've had with the steel industry is that we haven't really had any competition, because we closed down all the blast furnaces, and we were left with just one centre where there were blast furnaces. That's why it's appropriate, in my view, for the government to get in there and buy that and put things right.
Adrian, so Sir Christopher has no regrets about privatisation. What do you say to that?
First of all, I'm not surprised that this debate is resulting in people questioning why we have core utilities in private ownership and not being under the control of the public. And I'm really surprised to hear Sir Christopher arguing that the water company should have the ability to increase their bills more. We already have a third of people's bills going into paying the interest on the debt of the water companies and into shareholders' pockets. And in fact, if you look at the amount of money since privatisation that's gone into shareholders' pockets, over 80 billion, that's actually more than the amount it would cost, 65 billion by DEFRA's estimates, to fix our crumbling water infrastructure. infrastructure. And the longer that we leave water in private hands, the more people's bills are going into shareholders' pockets and not into fixing the problem. So I think it's the policies that the Green Party's been arguing for decades, that natural monopolies, core utilities, essential infrastructure for our energy security, for our national security, need to be in public hands. People are coming behind that now, as you have said, Aisha, but it's actually only the Green Party that's willing to make the argument for that.
Before I come to Sonia, Bethany, it's interesting that this, I would not say my listeners would be, I would not say that they're like uber left wing or anything like that. I think my listeners there's a broad spectrum of political views, but I am struck over, the last 3 days of covering this on the radio, the number of people who are just making that point about we flogged off. This is the kind of phrase, and it comes up so many times in different people. It's about, why did we flog off all the family silver? Someone said we didn't even just flog it off. We gave it to people. We gave it to people. Do you think there is going to be do you think there is a sort of public ideological shift on this?
I don't know if it's ideological, and I think it comes back to what we're seeing broadly in politics is this lack of trust, and people don't trust the institutions that govern us or carry our utilities. So they might not trust politicians for one reason, but they might not trust water companies because they know there is sewage in the rivers.
They definitely don't trust water companies.
Right, well. But they don't trust, energy companies because the bills are going up. And that's related to not trusting politicians because, they believe that politicians haven't done anything to change that. But I think generally speaking, this is a part of this wider movement where people are so unhappy with the way things work. Changing it, regardless of ideology, is quite an attractive idea right now to so many people. The thought of having affordable bills, of having working rail infrastructure, of which goes then to the infrastructure being built by these blast furnaces, the iron that comes from it, the steel that comes from it. And I don't think a lot of the shifts we're seeing in public opinion are actually anything to do with ideology. I think you can have people like your listener Swervey, who said they're a lifelong Conservative voter, and now they're really keen on renationalisation of many different industries, right? I think it is just people are tired of things working badly and they would like a change of the way it's governed. And in this instance, that means renationalisation. I think it would be the inverse if it was working badly under the government.
Really interesting messages coming through. Maria says the Tory government gave the opportunity to itself to be in the private sector. Absolutely extraordinary way of describing the force and rush selling of national resilience and future. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Someone else is saying, why can't we just pay shareholders less? I mean, this is something that really comes up a lot with water. Martin has a slightly different view, which is interesting. It's good to put on the other side. He said, I had a job when I was working. I'm now retired of deciding on what to outsource. One of the biggest drivers for outsourcing was to take the public pension load of the people working in the organisation of the public account and pass it on to industry, who in most cases slowly migrated that workforce onto money contribution. Those who say it's just renationalise must take this hidden cost into account. Today, the public pension load going forward is already unsustainable. That is an argument that many people make, saying, look, it's fine to talk about renationalising everything. There is a massive cost to doing that. I mean, Sonia, what's interesting about this is that, Keir Starmer, when he was running for leader, was very much into public ownership, common ownership. That was all over his kind of leaflets and his campaigning material. He became leader of the Labour Party. He's obviously been on quite a sort of journey, and he's not somebody who people would have associated with trying to renationalise everything. He's moved very away from that, but actually it does look like, that's kind of happening with train franchises. Obviously, this is now happening with British Steel. It is likely to be renationalised. Is it important for the government to listen to the concerns of the public? Because I don't think people are sort of saying, I'm coming at this from a sort of Jeremy Corbyn angle. A lot of people are looking at this. And actually, Maurice Glassman made a really interesting speech in the House of Lords yesterday where he is very in favour of nationalising key assets. But he said this is not kind of ideological. This was actually about national security in a new era. You know, your energy, your gas, your water, your ability to make steel. This is actually core to your defence and to things like making weapons. So actually, it does make sense. You know, if there was to be a war, you would want to be in control of those utilities. Is that an argument that the Labour government is going to have to sort of consider?
Of course, I think every single MP that's elected will listen to their constituents and speak to them and say what their thoughts are. We get emails inundated through our inboxes saying what we should or shouldn't be doing as a government. And I think when you come into rail, you know, if there's an industry that isn't working and it means that our transport system is failing, we've got, you know, we had a failing steel, industry. So we would have to have some intervention there. And I think it's looking at each industry separately. I am an NHS physiotherapist. The National Health Service is an excellent example of nationalisation and what benefit it has brought. Instead of having to have imaging done through, you know, private sector, you can get such an MRI and cost you £400. This is now free for people that need emergency care. If you need to have emergency spinal, you know, surgery or something like that. So I think there is definitely a case for nationalisation, and then NHS is definitely the one that I would say would come up to my mind. And in terms of rail, I think, yeah, we have nationalised, and we said that we would nationalise rail. This may be no extra money to the public purse once the contracts end. Those train services will then go national. And with steel, I can't say whether that we will go to nationalisation of steel, but I think we have put powers in to ensure that that furnace is still going.
Sure, but it's likely. And we spoke to loads of steel experts yesterday, and they were saying it's highly unlikely that another company would want to come in when you've got a plant which is, and to Christopher Chope's point, those furnaces are quite old now, and they're losing 700,000 a day. The chances, and also there is also the issue of, you know, whether. Right now, after what happened with Jingye, would you want another kind of foreign national company coming in after all of that? Well, look, let's just another question on steel that's just come through. Jason says, the underlying issue and the elephant in the room is the cost of energy. If energy prices were competitive, even in European terms, then all this talk of nationalisation probably wouldn't have come about. The government needs to address the problematic marginal pricing of electricity in the UK. That's from Jason, who works in the energy business. We did have a very interesting conversation with Dale Vince about that, and he said that he thinks that breaking this link between gas and renewables would be absolutely critical. And someone else is messaging saying the pension costs of renationalisation, ? We're back to how are we going to pay for any benefits when AI strips away the jobs? It is all linked. And Gaz says, I bet they wish they hadn't closed the coal mines down. Well, look, stay with us. We've got plenty more to come. A really interesting panel, very interesting to properly get into the guts of this topic, because it is really, really important and is going to affect our politics and our economy and our industrial base going forward. But it's just gone 5:50. You're listening to Aisha Hazarika on Times Radio. Now, just one other angle I wanted to get a reaction to from my panel. Yesterday, Jonathan Reynolds and others suggested that the Chinese owners of British Steel, Jingye, turned down huge amounts of financial assistance, and that they were essentially holding the government to ransom in talks, or that there was something even more malevolent going on behind the scenes. Let's listen to what the Labour peer John Reid, Lord Reid, had to say during the debate in the Lords yesterday.
Did it never occur to anyone in the last government that it may be, in a competitive world, in the interests of the Chinese government to purchase and then close down the British steel industry? And if that wasn't considered, then there was a gross omission of responsibility, I'm afraid, by the previous government.
So I just want to get some thoughts on whether the panel believe that Jingye did want to pull the rug from under British steel manufacturing, and why would that be? We're quite short on time, so if we could keep our answers reasonably brief, I would appreciate that. Sir Christopher Chope.
Well, we know that that's exactly what they wanted to do, because they're building a new steel production facility in China, and what they wanted to do was to use that production facility to supply the UK market. And so that is all part of their agenda. And indeed, this was an attempt at what I think is best described as industrial sabotage. And I'm glad that eventually the government called them out, because we can't afford to be victims of being held to ransom by the Chinese or any other country that's intent on industrial sabotage.
So you're saying this was not just a commercial decision. This was coming from much higher up in the Chinese authorities.
Exactly. In China, there's no distinction between a private company and the Chinese government. The Chinese government are behind this.
Bethany.
I think I don't know what Jingye's plans were. What I do know is that the government have said, or representatives from the previous Conservative government have said, Jingye was the only company offering to buy the plant. And I think this is the problem that the current government will come up against now. What happens when they do try and sell it? There are very few buyers, and it represents we haven't gone further down the path of fixing this issue. The former Conservative government had one option to sell to this plant. Indeed, I guess they had an option to nationalise it. They didn't. And they were in the position, this government are clearly choosing a different option.
And also it's worth noting that, depending on what happens with the kind of trade war that's going on, there could be a lot of cheap Chinese steel flooding the British market as well, which will make things even more difficult. Adrian Ramsey, your thoughts on this?
I think what it does show is that the decision of the last government was very short-sighted, and I think it also shows that nationalisation is now inevitable.
What do you think about the Chinese government using this as sort of kind of, this going much more than just a sort of commercial decision, that this was actually being done for sort of nefarious kind of nationally strategic reasons for the Chinese government?
You could see how that would be the case. I can't say I've got inside information. You could see how that would be the case. But the point I would make is, if our government doesn't want to be subsidising a foreign-owned company, then that's exactly what it'll end up doing if it makes interventions, including buying of materials and so on, without actually bringing it back under UK control. And that's why one of the many reasons why that now needs to happen.
And Adrian, it's just really interesting because the Greens, as you say, you're the only party that is kind of full fat. Not that I'm not fact shaming you, but just full fat renationalisation, bring everything back into public ownership. In a way, you're chiming most with what a lot of my listeners are saying, which is, we've got to bring everything on shore, enough of foreign interference. Do you worry that's a bit kind of little Britain in our attitude? It's a little bit Donald Trump-like in a way.
Far from it, and as you said yourself earlier on, there is wide support from voters across the political spectrum for having core utilities under public ownership. It is about security, both energy security and national security, and it's also about jobs. We have hollowed out our economy in recent decades by offshoring manufacturing, but we've also left ourselves vulnerable to changes in the international political situation and to climate breakdown, and we've got a huge opportunity now by relocalising more manufacturing and more farming.
Sonia, do you think that actually what was going on here was some form of Chinese governmental sabotage?
No, I think we need to look at the business itself. It's a business that was failing, that hadn't got their accounts sorted, they hadn't got proper auditors. Two auditors had left.
But why was that? Given that they're very close to the Chinese Communist Party, why do you not think that there's an argument they could have just kind of been instructed to kind of run down the company, have shonky accounts?
I think we need to differentiate between the Chinese government and a Chinese company. This could be any company from any other part of the world. So I wouldn't want to, I don't have that information. I'm not privy to that information if there is that the case, but as far as I'm aware, it's two separate things.
And why do you think they turned down such huge amounts of financial assistance, as Jonathan Reynolds said? Because that's weird, isn't it? From a commercial point of view, if you're getting so much money handed to you, why would you not take it?
I think the company itself was clearly struggling. It was struggling with their finances. They were losing £700,000 a day. and they wanted to close it, so they stopped bringing in the raw material, and we had to then come in.
But why wouldn't they take the money? If there's money on the table, why wouldn't you're right, it's a commercial entity, it's losing all that money. Why wouldn't they take, if there's money on the table, if it was not, if they didn't deliberately want to run that down? And why would they want to run that down?
I think it's also to do with the fact they can't, decarbonisation, high energy bills, the fact that they couldn't pay they were struggling to pay staff on there, and they wanted to lay people off. So I think it's a number of issues. I'm not privy to the actual fine detail, because what was going on between the conversation between Johnny Reynolds and the company itself. But
isn't it because we have pledged. They wanted to fund their own steel making facility in China, and they thought that they would be able to supply us with steel while making it themselves in China.
Yeah, well, I agree the fact that they did want to offshore it, but what the reason is between the Chinese government and the actual company itself. It just could be a company going, it wants to bring back, steel and bring back it to its own country. So I'm not going. I wouldn't be privy to that conversation. But at the end of the day, we have supported the steel industry with sort of 2.5 billion.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there, Sonia. But look, thank you so much to my panel. A Gaz messages in going, Chinese sabotage in plain sight. He says, Tory idiots. He says, we need British steel for defence and construction. And our messages in saying, do we also need to have a conversation about cooperatives and those who are the workers of such things like steel having primary ownership or leadership administration of such services?